Learn a block Gemara. Today's daf is daf Nun Zayin, and we're actually up to the bottom of the page by the two dots. Okay, we're learning by the carbon mincha that you're not allowed to turn it into chametz. No, you cannot do the kaimitz, the part that you scoop out to put in mizbeach. You can't make a chametz. Nor the shirayim, the balance can't make chametz. Okay, so the Gemara says v'hashta, and then we said, we also learn out that even the mincha itself, before you make it kaimitz, we're just beginning right now, we're by the two dots on the bottom. So we have three different limudim, one for the shirayim that you can't make a chametz left over, one for the kaimitz itself, and one for the mincha before even you make the kaimitz, that you're not allowed to turn it into chametz. So says the Gemara, so why does it say Asher Takriv Hashem? Takriv Hashem sounds like we're talking about the kaimitz. That the kaimitz you cannot make a sas chametz, but you're telling me that even before you set aside the kaimitz, the entire mincha itself, you're not allowed to make a chametz. So then, what do you need is asher takrivu? And we learn that from kol hamincha that even the entire mincha before you said the 4 lines to the bottom. The hash, so they're not going to call a mincha. Now they learn to call a mincha. What? That the entire mincha even before you do the kaimitz, you're not allowed to turn it into chametz. Asher takrivu Hashem lamali. So why does the pasuk highlight only that part that you bring to the Eibishter? What do you learn from that then? That we learn the following. Like in the Tanya, we learn an interesting machlekes. The pasuk that talks about that you're not allowed to make a chametz, that talking about those menachos, that you have a kaimitz that goes on the mizbeach, and then you have the shirayim that go to the kohen. What about a kaimitz? What about a mincha that the entire mincha goes on the mizbeach? Is there an isur of chametz there as well? Or what about a mincha that none of it goes on the mizbeach, like the shtei halechem, which we call a mincha as well, sometimes? And how do you know there's an isur of making a chametz there? Because none of it goes on the mizbeach. So we're going to have a machlekes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva. So what kind of menachas don't go, the entire thing gets a mizbeach, for example, the mincha of a kohen, the entire thing gets a mizbeach. And the Gemara talks about minchas nesachim, the mincha that you bring along with a carbon, with this kabbalah tzibur, the entire carbon goes on the mincha goes on mizbeach. How do you know there's an issa there of making it chametz, a sasa chametz? So the Gemara, is like in Tanya, we learned Asher takrivu l'rabbis minchas nesachim. Takrivu is telling you that even the entire mincha is brought up on the mizbeach, also there's an isur of making it chametz. And he holds that the minchas nesachim is a problem of chametz, and you have to be vigilant. Now, how is there a problem of chametz? A regular mincha, you put one loig of oil with the flour. When it comes to minchas nesachim, you actually put 3 loigin of oil with the flour. So normal mincha, you always have to add water because the oil is so little. There's no way in the world that you can turn it into a piece of dough. But when it comes to 3 loigin of oil with the flour, you don't need any water because there's plenty of oil there that can make you can produce the mincha. So there's a machlekes whether you add water or not. And Rabbi Yossi, as we'll see, holds that you add water to it, so therefore it's possible to become chametz. You got to be very careful. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. He said there's no water in this. There's no there's no water. Why would you have water? 3 loigin of oil. So there's no problem of chametz. Navas. So what's that? Shetakriv Hashem. L'rabbis lechem hapanim l'chimutz. And it's called takriv Hashem because you place it on the keli on the shulchan. You put it on the shulchan the lechem hapanim. So the Torah says you got to be careful. You don't turn it into chametz. Now, the lechem haponim, you measure it in a keli in these the isaron. The measure. You have 2 kinds of keli in the base of mikdash. We actually have 3. You have these kelim that are dedicated for liquids, klilach. You have kelim that are dedicated for dry things, and that's klei yavish. And Rabbi Akiva is the opinion that the flour you put into the keli is even though it's yavish, is also nimshich, is also called a klei sharis, which means the moment you put the flour in there, it becomes kodesh, and it becomes already set aside for lechem hapanim. And then you have to be careful that you don't make it chametz, because if you hold that these measured cups is not really klei kodesh, it's not klei sharis, so therefore it does not become. When does lechem hapanim become holy? Only when you bake it. So at the kneading process, even if you made a chametz, what did you do? It's not yet lechem hapanim. So obviously, Rabbi Akiva would hold, not like Rabbi Yossi, he would hold that lechem hapanim does become kodesh because you put it in klei shados. Rabbi Yossi would hold it's not klei shados, therefore he doesn't agree with lechem hapanim. So that's what Shetakriv Hashem has come to tell you. The lechem hapanim, be careful, and when you need it, it shouldn't become chametz. Now, first thing I want to ask a question. What's the problem of chametz? It's fruit juice. And we already had all the different opinions we discussed a few days ago, whether fruit juice is completely mutter, if it's totally fruit juice, or it's chametz nuksha, or dafki, if you put a little bit of water in, does it become chametz nuksha, or putting a little bit of water in makes it even worse because it accelerates the process. Right now, the Gemara, this here learns, so what's the problem? It says, what's it? No problem. He said, you add a little bit of water, that's why it's a problem. And it's kosher, nothing wrong with adding water, even though you had 3 logen of oil, and therefore it's possible to become chametz. Okay, the next part of Akiva says, lechem aponim midas yavishu. Cold man, you didn't put it in the oven. All you did was you put it in a keli to measure the flour. But it's a keli dedicated for dry things. Because of the view later on, the Oman midas yavish. He held that these kelim for dry, as associated what the base for that is, was never sanctified. So it's no lechem aponim till you bake it in the oven. The oven was inside the base of English. So what's the problem of leisasa chometz? Allah Ravin. So now you know from here, there's a Gemara here that Ravin's real name was Rab Reuven. All these names are like a little nickname, even though they won't say you should call it Ravin. But maybe this is really the source of all these names because there are a lot of funny names in Yerushalmi. You know, Abun and all these names. Mashmei de Rabbi Yechon, Kachi had social mission. This is how you should learn the mission. Format the mission differently. Punfaket, veifach. Turn it around. Asher takribu. Who says le rabbis lechem aponim? Who says that you marba lechem aponim because the kli yavish is also holy? Is not Rabbi Kiva. It's actually Rabbi Yasi. Lechimit, that's Rabbi Yasi Gluli. But he held that when it came to Menachos Daf, there's no water put into it, so there's nothing to talk about chametz there. And so Asher Tikriv Hashem is talking about lechem aponim. But Rabbi Kiva says lechem aponim is only measured in a dry cup. There's no kedusha there. So it's talking about Menachos Daf and you added water. And Rabbi Kiva l'rabbis Menachos Daf lechimitz. And va'ozor Rabbi Yechon tamei. Rabbi Yechon is consistent with the view that actually Rabbi Yasi holds that these kalim for dry goods were never sanctified. One of the Talmidim say one thing. Rabbi Yishmael follow Rabbi Yonasan with Talmidim and Rabbi Yishmael. So he said they say that what they follow Rabbi Yishmael. Tanya, we learned it says in Pasuk when Moshe Rabbeinu completed the Mishkan, he went and anointed all the kalim, and he also anointed all the kalim of the mizbeach. And then it says vayimshachem vayikadosh oisam. He anointed them and he sanctified these kalim, but oisam those and not others. So at the same time he sanctified, he's telling you that some of them were not. What was not? So here we have interesting machlekes. Rabbi Yeshua says, midas halach, when it comes to those kelim, measure the hin and the chatzain and the third and all that, is midas halach, nimshech, bein b'fim mechutz, the inside and the outside. And the outside is important as well. So anything that spills over, let's say filled at the top and spills over, also becomes kaidish because it touches the outside, the surface. Midas yavish, but midas yavish also, but only nimshech b'fnim. Only the inside. But the bottom line is that Yeshua holds that the klishadas, that the clay yavish also became a klishadas. And that's the view of Rabbi Yisrael Glili. That's the view of Rabbi Yisrael Glili. So therefore, lechem aponim became kodesh and shayat to become chametz. Rabbi Yonasan, however, says, midas halach nimshich only midas halach. He says, oisam is coming to limit the midas halach, that they only anointed mifnim. The ein nimshich, not the outside. So anything that's supposed on the outside is not kodesh. What about midas yavish? They would not makdish it at all. So they shouldn't have any problems of linen and all that. They wouldn't makdish it. And Tedach, I'll prove it to you. I'll prove it to you from a pasuk that the shtei halechi you bring a shvu, as it says, when does it become holy? After you baked it. What do you mean after you baked it? That's when you put it in the keli to measure. Is that the keli that you use to measure flour is not holy? Where's the pasuk say that? See, if it says in the pasuk that you should be moshe seichem tavi, you should bring from your neighborhood lechem tnufa, the bread that you're going to wave, shtayim, 2 shnei esrei, 2 measures, soilis, which means the fine flour, tiyena, chametz tefena, you should bake it as chametz, and then it says bikurim l'Hashem. When did it become bikurim? When did it become holy? After you baked it. After you baked it, not before. So what's the argument? They argue the word oisam. Oisam is coming to limit. Yeshua holds that clay yavish also became holy. Then comes oisam and limits it. Limits it what? Only the inside of clay yavish, not the outside. Clay lach. Inside and outside. The outside. But Rabbi Yonasan says, I have a pasuk that tells me that the kelim we use for dry goods never became holy in the first place. And yet Ois is coming to limit. It must be talking about the clay lach, that only the inside is kodesh and not the outside. Rabbi Yonasan midas yavish chaylu. Well, you don't need a pasuk to exclude it. Ki yitzich, kra lemute is midas lach. Only liquids, mibachutz. So lema. So why is he would ask? Just like you said, Rabbi Yechon Tamei, that Rabbi Yesi follows Rabbi Yeshua. Why didn't you say that Rabbi Akiva follows Rabbi Yonasan? Say the same thing. Lema nam Rabbi Akiva Yechon Tamei Rabbi Shmuel. Amru Rabbi Echon Man Rabbi Yonasan. Who's the other Talmud Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yonasan? They're both Talmud Rabbi Shmuel, and said that he agrees with him. So Moshe said it's not so simple. Even though Rabbi Akiva agrees with Rabbi Yonasan when it comes to those kelim he used for dry goods, but he does not agree with him with those kelim when it comes to the wet. Because Rabbi Yonasan says only the inside of klei lach became kodesh, not the outside. Rabbi Akiva later on the Gemara holds inside and outside of klei lach is kodesh. They don't agree. Probably asked by a question. The whole Gemara was talking about l'chayda. What about the fact that it became kodesh in the keli that you measure? So you tell me, Maisa, that the keli you measure the flour wasn't kodesh, but the keli that you needed the flour in definitely became kodesh. Klei bisa, that's definitely klei sharis. So even the lechem hapanim did not become holy in the cup when you measure the flour, but would have become holy when you needed it. So therefore, it's a problem of chametz. Why is there an opinion that says that lechem hapanim we're not worried about chametz because it doesn't happen until after you bake it? Isn't the bisa that it's a moist keli? It can be used for everything. On Malay, he said they didn't use bisa. We're talking about a case. You need it on top of a piece of leather. So there's no clay shutters in. That's why it didn't become kodesh till you bake it. So they call Malay. So then what's Rabbi Yonasan's ayah? Rabbi Yonasan talks about the shtei halechem. We're talking about the chaponim. Rabbi Yonasan talks about the shtei halechem, and the pasuk says it only became kodesh after you baked it. Maybe that's talking about a case where you didn't put it in any proper kelim. Why don't you say, maybe his whole proof is that the keli, that measure, didn't come kodesh. Say that it's not proof at all. It's talking about a case where you put it in a cup, which wasn't a klei shadas. But most cups are yisaron were klei shadas. He happened to use a klei chayil. And therefore, in that case, it's only now that you tell me you have alternatives. You don't have to use a klei bisa. You can use a leather, thing to kneading board. So he used another keli, not the klei chayil. Is what's his whole He happened to use a measuring cup that was not klei shadas. How does that prove that there were no klei shadas measuring cups? What are you comparing to? When it comes to the kneading board, nobody will tell you insist that you have to use one of the klei shadas to knead it. Who cares on what you use? You use a klei chayil. Okay. So therefore, there's no kedusha by the lechem hapanim. When it comes to measure the amount of flour, it says, I want you to make these kalim so you can measure the flour. How can you not use it? Doesn't make sense. The Federation has a good raya. We learned Menayin. We learned before. We learned Menayin. How do you know this concept? So when it comes to chatas, you put the imurim and the chayil of the fats and the limbs on the mizbech, and the meat is eaten by the kohanim. What happens if you take the meat of the korban chatas and you put it on the mizbech and you burn it? It's an aveda. How do you know? How do you know? You took the meat of the chatas, the meat of the oshim, the meat of the kachim, kalan. All of these things are meant to be eaten by you. The leftover of the aimer. The leftover of the two levels of bread. Now, why is it called leftover? Is because it has two lambs, because the entire two breads are eaten by the kohanim, but it comes with two sheep. So it's like leftover. It's also considered leftover. Why? Because you have the bazich, you have the levina that's inside the bazich, and you have the frankincense that you put in mizbeach. So the bread is considered leftover. How do you know if you take the bread instead of giving it to the kohen and you put it in mizbeach to burn it? Menachos, or the leftover menachos that was meant to be eaten. To beloises the oven aveda. Tamloim. It says the pasuk kicholsa any sourdough and any honey. Leisaktidu, do not put it on the mizbeach. And then it said mimenu ish l'Hashem, and we darshan mimen leisaktidu. You shouldn't burn. Anything that from it, Isha, La Hashem, anything that you put part of it on the Mizbeach, then Leisaktida, don't burn the rest of it. Anything that part of it in the fire, even of burning it. Someone has a question. You tell me the two loaves of bread and the lechem haponim are also included in Zaveda, but Tanya because they're leftovers. What time you learn when it comes to Hagosha, you have to approach the Mizbeach. It says Yotzu Shtei Halechem Lechaponim. The Shtei Halechem and the Lechem Haponim are an exception. She'ein Mehem Liishim. There's no leftovers there because the entire Shtei Lechem gets eaten by the Kohanim, and the entire Lechem Haponim get eaten by the Kohanim. It's not leftovers. You have to bring it approach the Mizbeach. When it comes to approaching Mizbech, it has to be part of it. And Mizbech, there isn't, so therefore you don't have to approach the Mizbech. When it comes to the Isser of roasting on the Mizbech, Mimenu, since that they're leftovers from the two lambs, they are leftovers from the frankincense, it's considered leftovers. It when we learned, if you took the balance, let's say, of the chatos, you're not allowed to, but instead of putting it on Mizbech, you put it on the ramp and to burn it there. Rabbi Yechon says, Chayiv also Chayiv. But says there you put only if you put it on the mizbeach and burnt it. The Tanya it says hamizbeach. It says the brayse hamizbeach. Then possibly putting on mizbeach, but it's instead of saying mizbeach, it says the ela mizbeach. Well, it means and also that which near the mizbeach, which is attached to mizbeach, insignificant mizbeach. That's the ramp. You shouldn't bring it up. And Rabbi part of my time with Omakro, it says in Pasik to oil with Dvash. First, one Pasik says you shouldn't bring soy, you shouldn't bring Dvash, you shouldn't burn it like Saktilu on the fire. And the next Pasik, which you're talking about, starts off carbon rashis. Takrivu oisam. That only when it comes to rashis do I say the elam is beich if you put on the ramp it's usher. And what's rashis? Oisam with Rabbi Kevin beich. And what's considered rashis? Rashis is only the sa'ir and the bekurim. Only that. Rashis is that. So that's the two halechem. The shtei halechem is called rashis, and that comes as as bread. And why is that rashis? Because that's the first wheat that you put on the mizbech. You call that rashis, and also the. What do you call it? And Bekurim comes from Dvash. So that's called Rashis. So when the Torah says the Elam Mizbech, you should not only not put it on the Mizbech, but don't put it on the ramp, we're talking about things which are called Rashis. And what's called Rashis? Only the Shtei Alechem. But all the other kabbanas, the meat of the chatos, if you instead of burning it on the Mizbech, you burnt it on the ramp, we're not going to say you're oive mimenu, call mimenu Yishal Hashem. That we're not going to say. It's the first wheat that's brought on the Mizbech of the new crop. You're now bring it, yeah. Yeah, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan, sorry?
I think it's brought from the Omer.
The Menachos Daf is all brought on the Mizbech. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechon, what does he do with the word Oisam? What does he do with the word Oisam? He said that all the kabbanis now put on the Mizbeach. So what's come to limit? The boiler can use the following. I would have thought Yochid misnadiv umaydi ki yochid benadava. A Yochid can say, I want to give 2 loaves of bread as a private donation. Replicated the 2 loaves of bread you do in Shavuos, the Koryani buy, and then we'll follow and say, Moitzes Vasecha Tishma, you got to keep your words. But Asisa do Tamaloim, therefore said the Pasik, carbon rashis takrivu is in plural. Tzibur Amakilach, this carbon of Shelechem is only, it's a communal carbon, but lo Yachid, not a voluntary carbon. Okay, a Yachid can't volunteer it. Well, you hate Tzibur maybe the Tzibur can take from the communal coffers and say, we want to bring a voluntary carbon of 2 loaves, because it says takrivu plural. But they can bring something like it. That's what Isaac comes to tell you. And what are we going to add, as the Bryce will explain? The Chayda is mashman obligations. What are you obligating here then? If you bring 2 loaves of bread from the sourdough and bikoyim from the honey, and the what to tell you that shtei halechem what you cannot give those donations. Says the Gemara, shtei halechem la'yikru nadava. You tell me that you cannot bring the 2 loaves of bread as an adava. But time we learned imnema kol sa'oid. We learned that when it says kol sa'oid v'chol devash, that even if you did only half a kaimitz of sourdough, half a kaimitz of honey, you're also chayiv for bringing it up. Imnema kol sa'oid lama nema kol devash. Once you know already half a kaimitz, what you have to say the same thing kol again there. Kol devash lama nema kol sa'oid. Each one has a leniency. There's a leniency by sourdough that you don't have by honey. There's a leniency by honey that you don't have by sourdough. So sourdough, you're allowed to bring it in the base of Migdash sometimes. We'll soon see what that's talking about. And the Vash Lahuta Miklali, honey never can bring the Migdash. The Vash, If the balance of the mincha with the kohen can eat, they can add mustard, they can add things to give it, to make it tasty. So we learned before pasuk that for it says chelkam, like chelkam, that what you're not allowed to have chametz chelkam, that even the balance you're not allowed to add chametz. Because each one has a leniency, therefore the Torah has a spell out. Despite the leniencies, despite the leniencies that they have, yet a half a kaimetz, if you put on the pech, you are chayiv. Now, what do you mean by sa'oid huta miklov? It's leading to our question. What do you mean sa'oid huta miklov? Midrash, mind you, what you're talking about? Lav shtei halechem. When was sa'oid permitted in the base of midrash? Must be the 2 loaves of bread, which is the only mincha that you have your sourdough, and you're allowed to bring as an adova, the carve adova. That's huta miklov. You can't say the shtei halechem itself. That's the mitzvah. That's not huta miklov. That is the mitzvah. But I can bring it as well. So that kasha, you said you cannot donate. That's not what it means at all. It means that even though you have shtei lechem, which is the mitzvah, you're allowed to also bring the 2 lambs with them, and the 2 lambs with them is they brought with the shtei lechem, and that's l'chayda that huter miklon as far as they're concerned that they can be part of it. Says the also you can, which is the honey. Bikurim is the honey, the dates, and you can bring a carbon with it. So they're also, what's the leniency of here that you bring 2 lambs? Over there also you bring the birds, because now we learned how good you should bring baskets, and the birds were hanging. You should bring birds at the top of the basket as well. They brought them as an oila. The basket needed kind of gave the kind of. So they brought kabbanas as well. So it's the same cooler that you can bring. It's associated with honey. So the said, no, Hanu la'ate bekurim. They weren't really brought for kabbanas. They were brought to decorate the basket. It's not really a chayv. And if you don't bring it, you don't bring it. You don't have to. They just brought it because all the pomp and ceremony with the bekurim. And what they did bring was kabbanas shlamim, which has nothing to do with this, which is totally independent of the bikurim. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.